The bullies thought the new black girl was weak and easy to pick on, so they mocked her and tried to slap her across the face, a mistake they would soon regret. Amara Brooks, the 16-year-old girl with an unremarkable appearance and a familiar habit of keeping her head down, was not one to be easily subdued. Amara lowered her head as she navigated through the crowded hallways of Westbrook High, her old sneakers lightly tapping on the damp concrete floor. Amid the noisy crowd, she was like a tiny ink stain on a blank sheet of paper, quiet and unnoticed. 16 years old, the latest black girl at school. Another name on the long list of school transfers she had come to know by heart. An inevitable part of her father's military career, Lieutenant Colonel Terrence Brooks. Each time the luggage was packed, each time she said goodbye to places she hadn't had time to get used to, Amara reminded herself, it's always the same. Blend into the crowd. Just survive. Amara was slender, with a rich, honey-brown skin tone. Her natural curly hair often resisted any attempt to be tamed, forming a light cloud of tangles around her delicate face. Her thick-framed glasses obscured her sharp brown eyes, making her appear quieter, more harmless than she truly was. But behind that nondescript exterior, Amara Brooks hid a secret no one could have expected. 9 years of relentless martial arts training under the strict but loving guidance of her father, a former Special Forces operative. From Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to practical MMA techniques, from sweat-drenched training sessions in a dusty old garage to sparring with male fighters twice her size, she had forged herself into a silent warrior. Amara earned her black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at 15, an achievement that earned respect from even many adults. Yet she never boasted about it. Her father had taught her, true strength doesn't need to be flaunted. You fight only when there's no other choice. Today, like every day before, Amara wished for only one thing: to be invisible. She lightly adjusted her backpack straps and kept her head down, weaving through the crowded hallway, the laughter and greetings bouncing off her ears like sounds from a distant world. No one knew that, right there in the sea of people, was a small girl with skills capable of taking down all 3 bullies in less than a minute, if she had no choice. But Amara didn't want to fight, not here, not this time. If she were lucky, she thought, no one would notice her existence. What she didn't know was that, just a few weeks from now, everything at Westbrook High would change forever, because her silence was merely the calm before the storm. But at Westbrook High, being invisible was not an easy feat. From the very first morning, Amara could clearly feel an unspoken rule embedded in every corner of the hallways. This world didn't operate by the school's rules, but by the power of a few individuals. And at the top of that pyramid stood Chase Donovan, the teenager with the perfect appearance of a self-proclaimed king. Short, neatly trimmed blonde hair, school uniform always carelessly immaculate, and cold, pale blue eyes like a frozen lake. Chase didn't need to shout to get attention. Just the way he leaned against the wall, smirking when someone hurriedly stepped aside, was enough to show his power here. Always by his side was a Troy Simmons, the football linebacker with muscles like rocks and a mind as simple as a sketch. Troy was big, rough, and dangerous in his thoughtlessness. He liked to laugh loudly after each act of bullying, as if it were just a harmless game. In contrast, Logan Pierce, the quieter shadow, made Amara shiver in a different way. Logan had a tall, lean frame, thin glasses, and the appearance of an honor student. But his cold, gray eyes held a chilling detachment, as if he existed only to seek out others' weaknesses, memorize them, and then crush them with the most merciless blows. These 3, Chase, Troy, and Logan, moved through the hallways like a pack of wolves slowly hunting their prey. A glance, a whistle, a taunt, Just that was enough to put someone on their target list. And at Westbrook High, being noticed by them was like getting a one-way ticket to hell. Amara realized this immediately, but before she could think of how to avoid them, a small voice spoke up beside her. "Watch out for them." Amara turned. A black girl with neatly braided hair and a hesitant smile was standing next to her. "I'm Aaliyah," the girl introduced herself, her voice barely above a whisper, as though afraid the walls might be listening. "If you're smart, stay away from Chase Donovan and his crew. Everyone here knows that rule." Amara nodded slightly, imprinting the warning deep into her mind. She knew people like Chase. She had encountered them in every new school, those who believed power was a birthright and that others existed only to be dominated. What Amara didn't know was that just one wrong move would put her in their sights, and this time she couldn't just avoid them. This time, everything would be different. And like an unwritten rule at Westbrook High, vigilance was never enough. 3 days after Aaliyah's quiet warning, as Amara hurriedly carried a towering stack of books from the library to class, it happened. The hallway was packed at the end of third period, like a chaotic river. The sounds of shoes, laughter, and slaps on the back formed a noisy background, making it easy for anyone to be swept away like a stray twig. Amara kept her head down, clutching the stack of books to her chest, trying to maneuver through groups of students clustered in 3s and 4s. She turned sharply at the corner near the gym, not realizing that at that exact moment, Troy Simmons, the massive football linebacker, was casually approaching from the opposite direction. The collision happened like a silent explosion. Amara crashed straight into Troy, the books in her hands scattering across the floor, one slamming into his foot before flipping open. The space around them seemed to hold its breath for a brief moment. Then Troy's gaze slowly dropped, and Amara felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't a confused or forgiving look. It wasn't the gaze of someone who accidentally bumped into a new student. It was the look of a predator, sliding, scrutinizing, analyzing, like a large beast assessing the small prey that had carelessly wandered into its territory. A brief, furrowed brow flickered and disappeared, replaced by a venomous smirk. "Look at that, the clumsy little black girl," Troy said, his voice high and clear, ensuring no one within a 20-meter radius missed his words. "You run into people and don't even apologize? Who taught you manners?" A loud, mocking laugh erupted from the people around, spreading like ripples on water. Amara tightened her grip on her backpack. Part of her screamed to react, to straighten her back and retaliate. But another part, the part she had built over the years to survive, whispered, "Bow your head, step back, disappear." She bent down, gathering the scattered books, her hands trembling not out of fear, but from the anger held in check. Troy didn't stop. He leaned over her, the sound of his leather shoes scraping on the polished tile. "Watch out, kid. Not everyone here is as polite as I am," he drawled, his voice laced with both a threat and mockery. Logan Pierce was standing by the wall not far away, arms crossed over his chest, observing like a cat toying with its prey before delivering the final blow. His cold, gray eyes met Amara's, and in that instant she read 2 unspoken words: "Target confirmed." Amara hugged her books tightly, nodded briefly and withdrew without saying a word. It wasn't because she was afraid of Troy. It wasn't because she couldn't take him down in 3 moves. It was because she knew the real victory wasn't knocking out some fool in the hallway. The real victory was surviving long-term. It was not giving them a reason. But Westbrook High wasn't a place for that kind of strategy. That afternoon, in the cafeteria, The morning's collision became the talk of the day. Groups of students huddled together, glancing at Amara as she quietly carried her tray to a corner. Whispers and giggles filled the air. "That new girl, Amara." Heard she bumped into Troy and didn't even apologize, just stood there with that look. She must think she's so cool. Let's see how long she lasts. Amara felt Chase Donovan's gaze fall on her from the center table, where they sat like medieval kings, enjoying their default privileges. Chase's gaze was as cold as ice, but behind that coldness, she sensed a twisted sense of amusement. The hunt had begun. He tilted his head, exchanging a few words with Troy and Logan, all three laughing softly, their laughter short and sharp like knives. Aaliyah appeared as if from thin air, sitting across from Amara without a word. The girl gently placed a juice box on the table, a simple gesture but one laden with meaning. "You're not alone." Amara silently thanked her, gripping her tray tightly to keep her hands from shaking. The lunch passed in a thick, suffocating atmosphere. That afternoon, as Amara was cleaning out her locker, she found something new. A piece of paper slipped through the locker gap. On it, a scribbled message in black marker. "Watch out. I like playing with rabbits that know how to tremble." No signature, no need. Amara slowly folded the paper and tucked it into her jacket pocket, her heart turning cold as ice. The storm had truly begun. And this time, whether she liked it or not, Amara understood she would have to fight. Not just to protect herself, but to protect something far more important: her dignity, her pride, and her right to exist without bowing her head. The storm had truly begun, and the first sign of it came the very next morning. Amara had just bent down to place her books in her locker when a force slammed into her shoulder, knocking her off balance. The books slipped from her hands, scattering across the cold tile floor. Amara froze for a moment, taking a deep breath. Without even looking, she knew who the culprit was. The unmistakable loud laugh of Troy Simmons echoed through the hallway, followed by a whistle from a group of students passing by. No one helped her pick up the books. No one stopped. At Westbrook High, moments like this were like an ongoing entertainment show. The more people fell, the more others laughed. Amara bent down, picking up each book with tight fingers. At that moment, Logan Pierce walked up. Not fast, not slow, just like a predator who had patiently cornered its prey for a long time, waiting for the perfect moment. He stopped in front of Amara's locker, lazily chewing a piece of gum, then spit. The gum flew directly into the lock of her locker, sticking to it. A sticky mess. "Oops," Logan smirked, his voice drawn out, lazy as though it were a deliberate taunt. Another round of laughter erupted behind him, this time from even more groups of students. Some pretended to turn away, but Amara knew every eye was on her. They weren't looking with sympathy, but with the malicious pleasure of those watching a cruel game they didn't have to take responsibility for. She stood up straight, brushing dust from her jeans, her gaze locking on the gum stuck to the lock. Her heart pounded in her chest, but steadily, like a drum echoing in an empty room. She had learned to control her breath, learned to stay calm when her temples throbbed. "Don't react," Amara told herself, her voice inside her head as firm as a command. "Don't give them the victory. Don't show them you're fragile." So, she lowered her head, opened her backpack, and quietly took out an old pencil. With a few quick, smooth motions, she skillfully removed the gum without revealing any hesitation. When the lock clicked open with a small click, Amara hid a faint smile at the corner of her lips. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. At least this time, she didn't let them seize control of her emotions. But predators like Chase, Troy, and Logan didn't stop after one failure. The following days, they changed tactics. No more obvious, direct attacks. Instead, they went for smaller, quieter, more insidious blows. One morning, Amara opened her locker and found an old worn hoodie carelessly thrown inside, with the words scrawled across the back in marker. "Go back to the swamp, country girl." On another day, while sitting in math class, something light tapped against the back of her head. A crumpled piece of paper. She unfolded it. Scrawled on it were the words, "Watch out. The nightmare has only just begun." Whispers and mocking glances surrounded her throughout the day. Rumors about the strange, rude black girl from a place no one wants to know about spread through the hallways like an infectious disease. They fabricated an entire story, that Amara had been expelled from her old school for fighting, that her father was a criminal, that her mother had left when she was young. Each time the rumors were repeated, they added more, twisted more, wove more lies, like a grotesque armor draped over her, whether she wanted it or not. Amara knew this was just psychological warfare. She had seen it before, at every other school. She had survived. But surviving, Amara thought to herself, didn't mean it didn't hurt. In the evenings, after finishing her homework, she quietly retreated to the family garage, the place where the familiar punching bag stood. Under the dim yellow light, each punch she threw into the bag felt like striking the mocking faces of her tormentors. Her father, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, often sat on the porch, watching from a distance, not intervening. He understood. He knew that sometimes his daughter needed no advice, no comfort, but only a place to vent her anger while keeping her dignity intact. Fighting, he had once said, doesn't always mean throwing the first punch. Sometimes fighting means enduring until your opponent exposes their own weakness. Amara etched those words into her mind. But she also knew, once you've been marked, they wouldn't let go. They weren't satisfied when their prey merely bowed its head and endured. They wanted to see tears. They wanted to hear pleas. They wanted to feel the desperate power of their victim shatter beneath their feet. And when they couldn't get those things, Chase Donovan began to plan a larger attack. A blow to Amara's last shred of pride. A blow that he believed would break her completely. They wanted her to break, and Chase Donovan decided that he himself would push Amara Brooks to the very edge. That Thursday afternoon, the cafeteria at Westbrook High was packed with noise. The clattering of forks and trays, the shouting of friends calling out to each other, and the cheap pop music blaring from the loudspeakers all blended together into a chaotic mix, making anyone just want to hide in a quiet corner. Amara, as usual, chose the last table at the end of the row, right by the window, where she could look out at the empty football field and momentarily forget the noise behind her. She was silently eating her cold sandwich when the chair opposite her was suddenly pulled out. Amara looked up, and her brown eyes locked onto the familiar smirk. Chase Donovan. The navy varsity jacket casually draped over his shoulders, his tousled blonde hair still perfect, as if even the wind had to bow to him. He sat down with the ease of someone who believed they had the right to be anywhere, even in the world of those they intended to crush. "Welcome to Westbrook, the girl from the ghetto," Chase said, his voice sweet as honey, laced with acid. Around them, nearby groups of students suddenly fell silent. Ears perked up, eyes glanced over, and small smirks threatened to break out from the corners of mouths. Amara stayed still, placing her tray down, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Her gaze didn't shy away. She stared straight into Chase's cold, pale blue eyes and saw something more venomous than hatred: contempt. Chase leaned forward, resting his elbow on the table as though they were old friends chatting. "Don't get me wrong," he continued, his tone still polite, lethal. "We're very open here. Everyone gets a chance. It's just, there are some people, no matter how hard they try, who will never truly belong here." The quiet chuckles spread like a silent wave. "Like you," he added, sealing his insult with a final jab. Amara felt the pulse in her temples beat harder. One beat, then two. In her mind, the lessons of self-restraint came rushing back. Long hours of punching the bag until her hands bled, training with her father, falling down and getting back up without shedding a tear. She took a deep breath, tightening her grip on her backpack under the table. Not here, not now. Without saying a word, Amara stood up, lifted her now cold sandwich tray and walked away, the curious gazes like knives cutting through her back. The laughter chased her like a swarm of angry bees. She skipped lunch that day. She didn't return to the cafeteria for the following days. Instead, Amara ate her sandwiches quickly in the bathroom, or hid in the library, behind the dusty shelves where few people took notice. But that didn't stop them. When they couldn't find her in the cafeteria, they left small traces of their cruelty everywhere. Crumpled notes with filthy words slipped into the gaps of her locker. Distorted drawings of her with exaggerated features secretly hung in classrooms. One time, while Amara was flipping through books in the library, she found a textbook with its cover replaced. On the new cover, someone had printed in bold letters, "How to Survive When You're Trash." She closed the book, her eyes narrowing. For the 1,000th time, she told herself, "Don't let them win." But the truth was, each small stab, each word, each act, they piled up inside her like cold stones. They didn't pierce her heart, but they made the blood in her veins grow colder. And Chase, the ruthless director of it all, wasn't satisfied yet. He wanted a public performance. He wanted to break Amara in front of the whole school, to send the message that no one could stand against the rules he had set. So, the following Friday, at the evening basketball game that nearly the entire school attended, Chase decided to push the humiliation to its peak. As Amara stood in line at the concession stand, she could feel the eyes of the school on her from all directions. And then, amidst the noise and the cheering, a familiar voice rang out from somewhere behind her. "Hey, did anyone give that girl money for a ticket, or did she sneak in through the back like she did in the ghetto?" Laughter erupted, crueler than ever before. Amara stood frozen. In that moment, all the lessons of self-restraint, all the promises she made to herself, seemed to turn to dust. She turned around. She saw Chase, leaning against the lamppost, hands in his pockets, his half-smile casual. He wanted a reaction. He craved a scene. Her screaming, crying, running away. And the whole school would remember her as the black girl who couldn't take a joke. But Amara Brooks wouldn't give him that. Not a word, not a tear. She held her head high, turned her back, and walked away, leaving behind the laughter, the prying eyes, and a simmering frustration in Chase Donovan's chest. For the first time, he tasted defeat. But what he didn't know was that this very defeat would push him into a collapse from which he couldn't recover. Amara Brooks left the stadium as the mocking laughter still echoed behind her, each venomous jab that Chase Donovan had tried to drive into her, now fading into a distant murmur in the young girl's heart. But it was enough for the bitterness to rise in waves, crashing like a silent storm inside her. She didn't turn on the lights when she got home. She didn't greet her father as usual. She didn't even take her backpack off her shoulders. Amara walked straight through the small yard, bathed in moonlight, moving swiftly toward the garage behind the house, quiet as a pilgrim heading toward the only fire capable of burning away the fury that had filled her heart. The creaky wooden door swung open with a lonely squeak, and Amara stepped inside, letting the damp, cold air hit her face, letting the old yellow light from the ceiling spill onto her small figure like a haze of dust. The worn-out punching bag, its seams faded from time, swayed quietly from the ceiling, waiting, like a mute witness to the storm that was forming. Not tying her hair back, not changing her clothes, not putting on gloves, Amara dropped her backpack to the floor, clenched her bare, trembling hands, and charged straight at the familiar punching bag, as if charging straight into the eye of the storm. The first punches were clumsy, rough, without rhythm, without strategy, just pure rage spilling from the depths of her heart. Each blow slammed into the bag, making heavy, dry sounds that reverberated through the empty garage, each echo like an invisible accusation of the silence she had swallowed for so many days. Sweat quickly soaked Amara's forehead, dripping in stinging salty drops onto the cold cement floor. She could feel her shoulders burn, her arms trembling with every rhythm, but she didn't stop. She punched for every laugh at her expense. She punched for every humiliating note shoved into her locker. She punched for every look of disdain that slid past her in the crowded hallways. And she punched for herself, for having to hold back, for pretending it was fine, for not being able to stand tall and respond like a real fighter. But as the anger began to scorch her breath into rapid gasps, as her hands began to ache from the constant impact, somewhere amidst the screeching of the chain, Amara heard her father's voice echo back. A deep, patient voice, like a familiar tune that had seeped into her bones. Fight only when there's no way out. His voice filled her mind, without reproach, without urgency. Just a quiet guiding force that pulled her out of the whirlpool of her rage. Amara dropped her hands, letting her arms fall limp by her sides, her chest heaving like a red-hot forge. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, letting the cold air slide into her lungs, soothing the flames burning inside her chest. When she opened her eyes again, Amara Brooks was no longer the angry girl on the verge of losing control. She walked up to the punching bag, gently placing her hand on the rough surface now soaked with sweat. She clenched her fist, lifted it in a steady stance, and began again. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. Each punch precise, controlled, each strike like a steady breath. Like a dance her body had memorized long before she could read a single book. Each punch now wasn't to release anger. Each punch was to rebuild herself. A piece that linked to her resilience, a piece that linked to her self-respect. She wasn't fighting for revenge against Chase Donovan. She was fighting to protect Amara Brooks. As her breath slowed, as the sweat no longer streamed down but only dotted her forehead, Amara stepped back, leaning against the cold wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor, her back pressed against the cracked cement, her legs stretched out in tiredness. In the quiet garage, only the sound of her slow breathing filled the air. The yellow light flickered above her head, occasionally blinking as if it was about to go out, but still burning steadily, just like her. She closed her eyes, feeling the sweet exhaustion flood her muscles, and a small, fragile smile flickered on her dry lips. The sound of the garage door creaking open gently pulled Amara from her thoughts. Lieutenant Colonel Terrence Brooks stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow, but his gaze softened with a rare gentleness that only a father who was truly proud of his child could have. He didn't ask anything, didn't scold her, just silently walked over, picked up the backpack she had thrown carelessly on the floor, and leaned against the wall next to her. After a while, he spoke, his voice deep and steady like the foundation of stone. "Are you all right, little warrior?" Amara lifted her head, her eyes, through the sweat and exhaustion, shining with a resilient and peaceful light. She nodded. No words needed. Her father understood. And in the quiet, stifling night of Westbrook, Amara knew. The real storm had not yet come, but she was ready to face it. With all the strength, resilience, and pride she had forged through each silent punch. They wanted her to fall, and Chase Donovan decided that he himself would push Amara Brooks to the very edge. That afternoon, the school day ended later than usual because of a group project in the library. The hallway gradually emptied, the fluorescent lights overhead casting a faint pale glow, stretching shadows across the white tile floor. Amara, with her backpack on, walked briskly toward the exit, hoping to leave the dark building before anyone noticed her. But as she turned toward the eastern stairwell, the shortcut she usually took to avoid the crowds at the main entrance, her survival instinct immediately rang an alarm. The air here felt heavier than usual. There were no sounds of laughter, no chatter, just the clicking of shoes echoing off the cold stairway. Before she could turn back, 3 shadows detached from the dark corners, blocking her way. Chase Donovan stood in the middle, his face briefly flashing a nonchalant smile, as if trapping someone in an unmonitored area was a routine thing for him, and what he was about to do was just a natural part of the world's order. Troy Simmons stood to the left, his massive frame blocking any escape. Logan Pierce leaned casually against the stair railing on the right, his cold gray eyes silently scanning her, as if calculating every small reaction from her. Amara stopped, her hand instinctively tightening around her backpack straps, the muscles beneath her uniform shirt tensing in quiet readiness. "Look who it is," Chase said, dragging each word lazily but chillingly. "Our little black princess." Troy let out a loud mocking laugh that reverberated in the confined space like a slap to the face. Amara didn't respond. She didn't take her eyes off the narrow gap between Chase and Logan, the only place she could slip through if things took a turn for the worse. But Chase had anticipated that. He stepped forward, blocking the path completely, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with sweat and cigarette smoke wafting in the air. "Don't be in such a hurry," he said, his smile half friendly, half predatory. "We just want to have a little chat." Amara leaned slightly to the side, trying to slip past. But Troy was quicker, circling around behind her, his breath hot and heavy on her neck, like a predator eager for its meal. Logan still said nothing, but his eyes slowly traced down her body, his indifference colder than any insult. "We're just wondering," Chase whispered, his voice lower, more intimate, but carrying more danger than all the crude shouting, "if our little black princess is really as tough as she pretends." Amara felt something tighten within her. This wasn't just childish teasing anymore. This wasn't just shoving in the hallways or whispering behind her back. This was a real hunt. Troy's hand landed on her shoulder, squeezing lightly, like a warning. And in that moment of stunned realization, Amara understood these people wouldn't stop at words. "Come on, don't act so cold," Troy sneered, his voice lewd, and his heavy hand began sliding down her back, slowly, lecherously. Amara froze for a moment. All the lessons of restraint, of patience, of enduring to survive, everything collapsed under that invading hand. All her instincts, honed over 9 years of training, exploded, sharp and unforgiving. In her mind, there was no longer a voice of reason. There was only one command: protect yourself. Now. She spun around, gripping Troy's wrist in a swift motion, so practiced that even she didn't realize it at first. With a twist of his wrist, an arm lock, Troy's body was bent down before he could comprehend what was happening, his face slamming into the cold wall with a sharp thud. Chase's eyes widened as he charged forward, but Amara was ready. She lifted her foot, sweeping his shin with a clean, precise kick, the impact as final as a knockout blow in a real fight. Logan, slower to react, lunged toward her, but Amara spun, using his momentum to throw him down the stairs, the sound of his body crashing against each step echoing like a series of firecrackers. It took less than 10 seconds. 3 predators lay sprawled at the foot of the stairs, gasping, in pain, unable to believe what had just happened. Amara Brooks stood tall, her figure casting a long shadow on the tile floor, not out of breath, not trembling, only her eyes, bright like 2 sharp blades of steel. "Never touch me again." Her voice was low, clear, each word scraping out from clenched teeth like an unappealable sentence. Without waiting for their reply, she turned, walking down the final steps, her back straight and proud, leaving behind the 3 helpless predators and the suffocating silence of the eastern stairwell. Once a trap for a small prey, but now the battlefield where they were utterly defeated. As Amara Brooks descended the final steps, leaving behind the 3 defeated predators, her heart didn't beat wildly with victory, nor did it tremble with fear. It beat steadily, rhythmically, like the drum of a warrior who had weathered many storms. The air in the eastern stairwell seemed to thicken, cold and heavy. The sound of heavy breathing, the soft groans from Chase Donovan, Troy Simmons, and Logan Pierce echoed back, blending with the slow but deliberate footsteps of Amara, stretching out like the reverberations of a silent declaration. Everything had happened so fast it was almost unbelievable. Just one moment when Troy placed his hand on her body, a touch he thought would control her, a lunge he believed would break the will of the small prey, and all the years of strict training, the long nights of bloodied knuckles, the sparring sessions with opponents twice her size, all of it exploded like a violent flood in every muscle, every reflex deeply embedded in her blood. Amara didn't need to think. The battle instinct, refined and unwavering, took control of her body. In less than 10 seconds, before Chase even realized what was happening, before Troy could even react to the wrist lock that bent him to his knees, before Logan rushed in with blind rage, everything was over. Amara took Troy down with a basic but ruthlessly effective wrist lock, slamming his face into the wall without him even having time to scream. She spun like a whirlwind, using Chase's own momentum to throw him face first onto the hard cement floor, his breath releasing a heavy, pained grunt. Logan, quick but uncontrolled, became an easy victim for Amara's precise leg sweep, sending him crashing into the wall and sliding down like a torn sack. In less than 10 seconds, 3 predators who seemed invincible lay sprawled at her feet, breathless in pain, unable to believe what had just happened. Amara Brooks stood tall, her figure casting a long shadow on the floor, breathing steadily, not trembling, only her eyes blazing like 2 steel blades. "Never touch me again." Her voice was low, clear, each word cutting through the bones of the 3 men sprawled on the ground. No shouting, no trembling, just a simple, undeniable truth. Amara turned and walked away, her steps calm as if she had just left a regular training session, not having just defeated 3 of the most powerful figures at Westbrook High. But when her hand touched the doorknob leading to the backyard, when the first breath of the chilly afternoon air hit her face, still warm from the adrenaline, the weight of everything that had just happened crashed into her like a wave breaking against the shore. Amara leaned against the brick wall, closing her eyes, letting the rush of adrenaline flow through her veins. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but because her body, after the intense outburst, was finally allowing her to feel the terrible tension that had built up inside her. "I've done something irreversible," Amara thought, her mind swirling. This was no longer about not drawing attention, no longer about enduring until they get bored, no longer about suffering to survive. She had drawn a clear, unerasable line between herself and the ruling forces of Westbrook High. She had done what no one before her had dared to do, and she knew this wouldn't be forgotten. But strangely, she didn't regret it. No matter what came next, no matter how heavy the price, at that moment when Troy hit the ground, when Chase groaned, when Logan was left dazed, Amara Brooks had reclaimed what they had tried to strip away from her for weeks: her pride, her self-respect, and her right to exist without bowing her head. She adjusted the strap of her backpack on her shoulder, took a deep breath, and walked across the quiet schoolyard. Each step she took left a mark on the ground, stamping down an undeniable truth. She would no longer be the new black girl easy to bully. She would no longer be the prey. She had fought, and she had won, not just against them, but against the fear inside herself. Behind her, in the dark stairwell, the self-proclaimed kings lay on the ground, tasting the bitter flavor of defeat. And in the suffocating silence, a new truth was etched in. Westbrook High had a new rule, and Amara Brooks was the one who said it. Amara Brooks walked away, leaving behind the suffocating silence that filled the eastern stairwell, and only when her figure disappeared around the corner of the yard did the first groans from the 3 fallen men rise, marking the end of the arrogance and power they once held. But what Chase, Troy, and Logan failed to realize in that moment was that they no longer controlled the story. No one was left to silence it, no way to reverse it, because a witness had seen everything, and that small seed only needed a slight breeze to ignite into a blaze that no one could extinguish. Aaliyah, the black girl with neatly braided hair, the only one who had ever dared to whisper to Amara, "Be careful," had been standing on the landing of the upper stairwell at just the moment the confrontation happened. And she had seen it, all with her own wide eyes, a small black girl, cornered and pressed to the wall, take just 10 brief seconds to take down 3 of the most powerful figures at Westbrook High, as if they were nothing more than toddlers. Aaliyah didn't walk away. She stayed, silently observing, her eyes wide, her heart thumping in her chest. When Amara left, Aaliyah was still standing there, stunned, and by the next morning the news exploded. It didn't spread through emails, there were no social media posts, no group messages. At Westbrook High, rumors were stronger than any media channel. A whispered word in a hallway corner. A nudge in the cafeteria. A significant glance at the classroom door. In less than 2 periods, the entire school knew that Amara Brooks had taken down Chase Donovan, Troy Simmons, and Logan Pierce. Not through trickery, not with cunning, but with real strength. And, like every story passed through the crowd's mouth, the truth quickly grew into living legends, far greater than imagination. Some said Amara had been trained by the FBI, part of a special program for genius teens. Others swore that they'd heard from a cousin of a friend, that Amara kept weapons in her backpack, knives, nunchucks, even a mini stun gun. A group even whispered that she had black belts in 3 different martial arts and had won international titles, but had to hide her identity to protect her family. Some even claimed that Amara had taken down the 3 bullies with just 2 punches and a kick, like a scene straight out of an action movie. The story grew bigger with each passing whisper. every person adding a little something, each retelling making Amara Brooks seem both mysterious and terrifying, as if she were the main character in a secret action film. The strange thing was, no one mocked her anymore. There were no more contemptuous glances, no more quiet whispers behind her back. Instead, there was silence filled with a different emotion, a mix of respect and fear. The hallways that Amara once had to duck her head to avoid now seemed to open up as she walked through them. The eyes that once brushed past her like she was a tiny obstacle now hurriedly avoided making direct eye contact. Even in class, when Amara raised her hand to speak, the entire class fell silent, listening to every word she said as if she carried the power to make any disrespect face immediate consequences. As for Chase, Troy, and Logan, things were even worse. They disappeared from the lunchroom, no longer occupying the central table as they had ruled over it. They didn't stroll through the hallways with the same arrogant faces anymore. Even when walking to class, they quietly huddled in the corners, their eyes avoiding direct contact with anyone, because even though no one dared to openly point fingers, the way people looked at them, the quiet laughs that erupted as they passed, was enough to rip apart the cloak of power they had once worn. In the gym classes where whistles echoed, and in the boring study halls, the name Amara Brooks became a kind of legend. The boys whispered to each other, "Don't mess with that girl, she'll snap your neck." The girls talked excitedly. "Maybe she'll teach me a few moves?" Some even began to approach Aaliyah, asking, "Hey, you're the friend of the warrior, right? Can you introduce us?" Aaliyah, who had witnessed the storm in the stairwell that day, only smiled mysteriously, hiding the quiet pride building inside her. Amara knew the rumors had spiraled out of control, and she didn't like it. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She didn't want to become a legend or a symbol. She just wanted to quietly study, to live a normal life like any other teenager. But deep down, Amara understood something simple. Normal had never been an option for those who dared to stand tall when everyone else was bowing their heads. Though Amara Brooks had become accustomed to maintaining a calm demeanor, and had learned how to walk through hallways filled with rumors as if nothing could touch her, when the loudspeaker crackled the next morning, tearing through the faint silence of the morning announcements, she still felt her heart tighten. "Amara Brooks, please come to the principal's office. Amara Brooks, principal's office immediately." The entire room froze for a moment. Every gaze, curious, eager, even slightly anxious, turned toward her. Aaliyah, sitting beside Amara, gently placed her hand on Amara's arm, a subtle squeeze without words. Amara nodded, took a deep breath, and stood up. Stepping out of the classroom and across the familiar hallways, she felt like she was walking into an entirely different space, as though every brick, every door, every window was watching her, waiting to see if she would break or if she would once again stand tall. The principal's office was at the end of the ground floor hallway, a thick wooden door of dark brown, with a shining brass plaque. Mrs. Whitmore, Principal. Amara stood before the door for a heartbeat, tightening her grip on her backpack, and then knocked 3 sharp times. "Come in." Mrs. Whitmore's voice rang out, sharp yet not harsh. Amara pushed the door open. The principal was sitting behind a large oak desk, her tall, slender frame contrasted by her neat silver hair tied up, her sharp, gray-blue eyes peering over half-rimmed glasses. On the desk, a thick stack of files lay open, and beside it, a small computer screen displayed the security camera feed. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken seriousness. "Sit down, Amara," Mrs. Whitmore gestured. Amara dropped her backpack to the floor, sat up straight in the chair across from her, hands neatly resting on her thighs to hide the tension rising in her fingertips. Mrs. Whitmore studied her for a long moment, as if contemplating every tiny crease in the young girl's face before speaking. "Do you know why you're here?" Amara took a deep breath. "I guess it's because of what happened yesterday in the eastern stairwell." Her voice didn't tremble, but it wasn't defiant either. It was simply the truth. Mrs. Whitmore nodded slightly, then clasped her hands together, elbows resting on the desk. "Amara, at Westbrook High, school violence is absolutely unacceptable, no matter the circumstances. However—" She paused, her cold gaze slicing through Amara's face before softening into an unreadable consideration. "We also do not tolerate harassment, assault, or physical threats in any form." Amara swallowed hard, the pressure in her chest tightening like a rope around her heart. "So," Mrs. Whitmore continued, "before any conclusions are made, I want to hear it from you. All of it, from start to finish. No details left out." Amara told her story, piece by piece. No embellishments, no exaggerations, no defenses. She spoke about the first days, the accidental collisions, the mocking notes, the cruel whispers. She told of the evening at the stadium, the direct insults. And finally, she spoke about yesterday afternoon, the trap in the eastern stairwell, Troy's hand on her, and the explosive, instinctive reaction that followed. When she finished, Amara looked up, meeting Mrs. Whitmore's gaze directly. "I know fighting back is against the rules," she said, her voice low but firm. "But I also know that if I had done nothing, I would have been seriously harmed." The room was silent. Only the steady ticking of the wall clock could be heard. Mrs. Whitmore didn't reply immediately. She turned the computer screen toward Amara, pressing the play button. The security camera footage appeared, black and white, slightly blurred, but clear enough to show the entire sequence. Amara being cornered, Troy moving in, Chase and Logan closing in from the sides, and then, within a split second, her wrist lock, her takedown, her precise leg sweep that brought down the three giants. Amara stared at the screen, her throat dry. "You don't need to say anything more," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice lowering, the first hint of warmth in it. "I've watched this footage multiple times. What you did was not an attack. It was self-defense. Quick, efficient, and completely justified." Amara exhaled, a long, light breath, as if an invisible weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "Chase Donovan, Troy Simmons, and Logan Pierce have been suspended immediately," Mrs. Whitmore continued, her eyes flashing with sharp intent. "And the disciplinary board will review additional actions, particularly for their sexual harassment." Amara looked up, unable to hide her shock. This was not the outcome she had dared hope for. At her previous schools, she had been used to being blamed, used to the suspicious glances, the reports where the victim always had to prove their innocence. But here, for the first time, justice was on her side. "One more thing," Mrs. Whitmore said, leaning forward, her voice softening as though offering something important. "We are establishing a self-defense club for the girls, and we would very much like for you to become the coach." Amara blinked. For a moment she didn't know how to respond. But then, deep inside her, a stream of cool confidence, of recognition, began to flow out. "I would be happy to join," she replied, her voice firmer than ever. When Amara stepped out of the principal's office, the morning light fell on her slightly tousled hair, and her steps felt light, like the steady rhythm of a silent march, echoing through the halls where once she could only bow her head and walk quietly past. But now, Everything had changed. Not because she had won, but because she had stood firm, and the world around her had to change accordingly. As Amara Brooks left the principal's office, the morning chill swept through the long hallway, blowing old notices off the bulletin board. But she no longer felt small in this vast world. For the first time in years, for the first time after countless times of silently enduring, Amara walked with her shoulders straight, her chin held high, and her heart beating strong and free. No one stopped her, no one laughed. No more prying eyes, no more venomous whispers passing between people as there had been during her early days at Westbrook High. Because now, her name was no longer associated with mockery. Her name was associated with a power that the whole school had to acknowledge, whether with respect, with silent admiration, or with a visible wariness in every glance that passed her. The news that Amara had been invited to establish the Girls' Self-Defense Club spread like wildfire. A simple poster, a white sheet of paper posted outside the library with just a few simple words. Girls' Self-Defense Club. Learn how to stand strong. Coach, Amara Brooks. First meeting, Friday after school. That was it. No frills, no empty slogans. But it was enough to send a ripple through Westbrook. The next day, when Amara walked through the main hallway, she felt the difference in the glances she received. No longer with disdain or doubt, but with quick, cutting stares mixed with hesitation and quiet admiration. A group of younger girls, those with brightly dyed hair and oversized clothes that hid their small frames, whispered as she passed by. A few of the basketball players, those who used to nod along to Chase and Troy's laughter, now silently stepped aside, their eyes avoiding Amara's calm gaze. Aaliyah was the first to approach her after third period. She grabbed Amara's hand, her eyes sparkling with joy she couldn't hide. "You know," Aaliyah said, "we've been waiting a long time for someone like you. Someone who dares to stand up and doesn't back down." Amara smiled, a small, genuine smile, the first one in weeks since coming to Westbrook. Not because she craved to be a symbol, not because she wanted to be famous, but because for the first time in her life, she clearly felt her strength was no longer a burden to hide. It had become a light to guide others. That afternoon, the first meeting of the Girls' Self-Defense Club took place in the small gymnasium behind the stadium. Amara arrived early. She changed into a t-shirt, tied her curly hair into a high ponytail, her hands trembling slightly as she tightened the wristband around her arm. Not from fear, but from a new, unfamiliar feeling. The excitement of someone starting a new chapter in their life. The door opened. Aaliyah entered first, followed by 3 other girls, faces Amara only vaguely recognized from her classes. Ruby, the mischievous redhead from the band. Mia, the quiet girl who always sat in the back of English class. And Lila, the small first-year girl who always clutched her backpack to her chest. They sat in a row, their eyes wide, eager yet nervous. Amara walked to the center of the room, where the training mat stretched under her feet. She took a deep breath, then spoke. "I'm not a superhero. I'm not a ninja. I've been afraid. I've been scared. But what I've learned after all of this is this. Strength doesn't lie in never falling. It lies in daring to stand up, again and again." The room was completely silent. No one laughed, no one mocked, only genuine listening, something Amara had thought she had lost forever during her earlier years. The first training session was simple, but full of energy. Amara taught them the basic techniques, how to break free from a wrist grab, how to stand firm when pushed, how to protect the weak points of the body. No fancy moves, just skills that could save lives in the worst-case scenario. She patiently corrected each stance, each small movement, cheering for every effort, no matter how clumsy. Each time a girl got it right, the group applauded, the clapping echoing through the room like a collective heartbeat, as they learned how to grow stronger, piece by piece. And in that moment, Amara Brooks realized she was no longer fighting for herself alone. She was opening a path for others, those who had once been like her, who thought the only way to survive was to shrink, to silently endure. Now, they would learn how to stand tall. Now they would learn how to fight, not just with their fists, but with an unshakable sense of self-respect. As Amara Brooks left the first self-defense club training session, the laughter and applause that sparkled like early summer sunlight still lingered in the air, but she felt light as if she had shed a part of the invisible weight she had carried for so long. What she didn't know was that outside the gym door, someone was hesitating, struggling with themselves to cross the invisible threshold that had once kept them apart. That afternoon, as Amara was putting on her backpack and preparing to leave the schoolyard, she saw Vince Donovan, once known as Chase, the self-proclaimed king of Westbrook High, standing near the main gate. No varsity jacket swaggering. No arrogant smirk carved into his face like a habit. Just a lanky teenager in an old gray hoodie, hands in his pockets, head bowed low, standing awkwardly like someone lost in the very place that had once been their domain. Amara hesitated for a moment. Her instinct to stay alert flared for an instant, but then she restrained herself, exhaled quietly, and walked slowly toward the gate, pretending not to notice Vince's presence. She had learned not to react recklessly, not to give control to anyone but herself. But just as she was about to pass Vince, he spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Amara, could we talk for a minute?" Amara stopped, not in a hurry to turn around. She paused for a breath, considering. Then, slowly, she turned back, her steady brown eyes meeting Vince's avoiding blue ones. "Go ahead," she replied, her voice neither cold nor friendly. It was simply neutral, steady enough to make it hard for anyone to overtake her. Vince swallowed hard, his hands nervously clasped in front of his stomach, a gesture unfamiliar, completely out of place from the image he once portrayed. I just want to apologize," he said, each word seemingly dragged out of his throat. "I know, an apology probably won't change anything, but I need to say it." Amara remained silent, giving him the space to continue. After a long pause, he let out a breath, as though releasing an invisible chain from within. "I grew up with a father who always thought strength meant imposing yourself, that men had to dominate, make others fear you to earn respect." Vince's voice trailed off at the end, like a child trying to hide bruises beneath a thick jacket. Amara observed him quietly. For the first time, she didn't see Vince Donovan, the arrogant bully. She only saw a teenager with invisible scars no one had bothered to look at. "When I came to this school," Vince continued, still not daring to look up, "I thought the only way to survive was to be the one who made others bow their heads. I didn't realize I had become exactly what I hated the most." Amara took a deep breath, feeling the cold breeze against her neck. This wasn't the first time she'd heard a bully try to justify themselves, but this time something was different. There was an unspoken truth in how Vince's voice shook, in how he wasn't seeking easy forgiveness. He wasn't making excuses, he was just facing it, bare and vulnerable. She quietly considered for a long moment. Then, in her calm yet decisive voice, Amara said, "I don't need an empty apology, Vince. I don't need silent regret. If you truly want to change, then start with action." Vince looked up, and for the first time, their eyes met directly, unshielded. Amara took a step forward, her voice low and firm. Want to make things right? Be an example. Stand tall, not to threaten, but to protect. Not for me, but for those weaker than you, the ones you once bullied. A moment of silence passed between them. Heavy, yet necessary, like compacted soil before new seeds can sprout. Vince nodded slowly, as if every muscle in his face had to fight for that motion to become reality. I'll try, he whispered. No promises, no oaths, just two simple words, small, but carrying a will that was starting to rise for the first time since his old arrogant shell had cracked. Amara nodded back, not offering a forgiving smile, but not turning coldly away either. Simply acknowledgement, an opportunity. A door left ajar, but whether Vince would walk through it would be his choice. She turned, walked away, leaving Vince standing there in the open schoolyard alone, facing a new, rocky path ahead of him. And in Amara's heart there was no joy in victory, only peace. Because she understood, true change, like true victory, wasn't about knocking down an enemy. It was about giving them the chance to stand up on their own, for the first time, for the right reasons. As Amara Brooks walked away, leaving Vince Donovan standing in the sunlit schoolyard, she didn't look back, but she knew. A seed had been planted, fragile and vulnerable, but also full of hope. And, like the gentle but persistent spring rains, change began to seep into every corner of Westbrook High, silently but irresistibly. Not everyone changes overnight, but some, under the weight of failure, of the collapse of arrogance, are forced to reflect on themselves, and, in that brief moment between destruction and rebirth, they choose to rise in a new way. Logan Pierce, the teenager with the cold gray eyes that had once sent shivers down the spines of many students as he passed by, disappeared from the hallways in the days that followed. No longer were there the contemptuous glances that swept over everyone. No longer the whispered mocking comments from the corners of classrooms. It wasn't until nearly a week later that Logan was seen, in an entirely different context. He was sitting in the art club room, head bowed before an easel, holding a charcoal pencil, sketching strong but emotional lines on a blank canvas. At first, no one dared to approach. But Aaliyah, a senior member of the club, happened to glance over Logan's drawing and froze. It wasn't the cruel caricatures he had once used to humiliate others. It wasn't the mocking sketches that tore at self-esteem. It was a portrait of students in the school, drawn with sincere, gentle lines full of empathy that no one had ever imagined Logan Pierce capable of. Slowly, Logan integrated into the club. At first, he was quiet, speaking little, focused only on his brush and colors. But gradually, the silence no longer acted as a barrier, but became the foundation for small conversations about painting, about music, about things far beyond the power games he had once immersed himself in. No one forgot what Logan had done. No one denied the past, but no one refused him a chance, an opportunity to become a better version of himself. Meanwhile, Troy Simmons, the massive football linebacker who once made the hallways of Westbrook tremble with every step, changed as well, but in a different way. Troy's transformation wasn't loud, not as obvious as a punch to a punching bag or a beautiful painting. It started with small actions, but ones filled with effort and sincerity. The first day Troy returned to school after his suspension, everyone held their breath to see how he would react. But instead of walking proudly with his usual defiance, Troy walked slowly down the hallway, eyes straight ahead, shoulders slightly slouched, like silently acknowledging his mistakes. And then, one by one, Troy approached the students he had once mocked, shoved, humiliated. No fanfare, no excuses, just an apology, hesitant, awkward, clumsy, but sincere enough to be hard to reject. "I'm sorry, Mia," he said to the small girl who had often had her backpack yanked, his voice rough as if each word was dragged out with immense effort. "I was wrong. I'm sorry, Eric," he whispered to the chubby boy he had once given a cruel nickname, his big hands fumbling like a clumsy child. "I shouldn't have treated you like that." There were reluctant shrugs, there were doubtful glances, but there were also slow nods, small acts of forgiveness, enough to open the door for a new beginning. Amara heard about these changes, not through rumors, but through snippets of conversation in the classrooms, through whispers of surprise, but no longer laced with the sharpness they once had. She didn't seek them out. She didn't need to face them again. Because she understood, true change doesn't need witnesses to be acknowledged. It happens quietly, steadily, through small actions, every day. That afternoon, while Amara was guiding a group of girls through basic defensive stances in the self-defense club, she witnessed something unusual. Through the frosted window, she saw Troy Simmons, in his football uniform, teaching a younger student, a small, timid boy, how to properly hold a football. Troy wasn't shouting. He wasn't mocking. He was simply patiently adjusting the boy's movements, a shy but genuine smile on his face, a stark contrast to the frown he used to wear. Amara stood still, a small, faint smile slowly forming on her lips. She didn't need anyone to say it out loud. She knew. They, those who had once been the symbols of bullying, were also learning how to exist again. Not by putting others down, but by lifting them up. As Amara Brooks stood inside the gym, quietly observing Troy Simmons as he bent down to guide a younger boy, she felt something both warm and unfamiliar spreading throughout her chest. A part of this world, the very one that had once pushed her out, that had made her feel like an outsider, was silently changing. And for the first time throughout her long journey of school transfers, of days spent merely surviving, Amara understood. She was no longer just an outsider. She truly belonged here. Not everything changed overnight. Not all the gazes turned warm. Not every whisper was kind. But that no longer made Amara tremble like it used to, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing this alone. Beside her was Aaliyah, the girl with bright eyes and a steady heart, who had never left Amara's side during the toughest storms. Beside her was the group of girls in the girls' self-defense club, real friends who had seen Amara through her determined eyes and precise strikes, not through the malicious rumors. After-school meetings became a part of her new life. No longer were the afternoons spent sitting alone in the library, hiding behind dusty shelves. Now, Amara was practicing stances with the girls, learning to trust her own body, learning how to say no to the world if needed. Some days, they spent hours just laughing, arm wrestling, or sharing little stories about life, simple things that Amara had once thought she would never get the chance to experience. She learned how to laugh without guarding herself. She learned how to sit among a circle of friends without clutching her backpack like a shield. She learned how to believe that in certain places, with certain people, she would be seen, not as the weird black girl, not as the outsider, but as herself, whole and deserving. One Saturday afternoon, during a small outdoor meeting of the club, with the golden sunlight pouring over the schoolyard, Amara sat between Aaliyah, Ruby, Mia, and Lila. They ate pizza while passionately debating whether they should add a psychological response skills class to the self-defense curriculum. Ruby suggested learning how to respond to verbal harassment. Mia suggested adding lessons on confident body language. Lila shyly proposed creating more practice sessions with simulated situations. Amara listened to each of them, jotting down notes in her old notebook. And in that moment, as the laughter and debates rose along with the pigeons soaring over the yard, Amara understood something deeply, to the point of being overwhelmed. She was no longer just existing. She was living. In a secluded corner of the schoolyard, Logan Pierce sat by an easel, carefully sketching the activities of the club, gentle and respectful strokes, with no trace of the mockery he used to display. Not far away, Troy Simmons jogged around the yard, and each time he passed Amara and the group, he would nod slightly. A simple, genuine greeting, as if saying, "I see you, and I'm grateful for that." Even Vince, though still hesitant to join, had started to change. He was no longer the dominating shadow in the hallway. He quietly helped other students move tables after lunch, joined the tutoring team for those struggling in class, slowly, bit by bit, repairing the damage he had once done. One afternoon, when Amara and Ilea sat on the steps in front of the library, sipping lemonade and sharing their future dreams, Ilea suddenly tilted her head, smiling mischievously. "You know, Amara, if you hadn't fought back in the eastern stairwell that day, maybe Westbrook would still be the same dirty hole it was before." Amara laughed, her laughter echoing in the soft golden light of the afternoon. "I just did what I had to do." "Sometimes all it takes is one person doing the right thing," Ilea said, her eyes sparkling, "and that's enough to make the whole world around them change." Amara looked up, gazing at the schoolyard where the girls were practicing their stances in the sun, where cheers of encouragement rang out, where old scars were slowly being healed by courage and friendship. And she knew, deep in her heart, that she had found the most precious thing. Not victory, not a medal, but a place to belong, a place called home. In the final days before winter break, as the sky over Westbrook turned silver gray and the chill crept through every hallway, Amara Brooks could distinctly feel the steady but warm rhythm spreading throughout the school, which had once been cold and divided. The corners of the hallways that had once echoed with mocking laughter were now silent. The benches that were once gathering places for the rulers now made room for diverse groups of students from every ethnicity and social class, sitting together, talking, laughing. A quiet but irreversible change had taken place. And Amara, deep in her heart, knew that she had contributed to that change, not with noise, but with silent strength more enduring than any flame. On the last morning before the break, Amara arrived at school earlier than usual. She opened her locker, preparing to grab her books for the last class. But instead of books, her eyes landed on something small and unfamiliar tucked neatly inside the locker. A keychain, small, simple, but with a unique shape. A fist, intricately molded in polished white steel, gleaming under the light. Attached to it was a note, with just one sentence written in messy but sincere handwriting. "Thank you, the girl who taught us how to stand tall. Vince, Troy, and Logan." Amara stood frozen for a few seconds, the keychain cold in her hand. She read the note over and over again, her heart swelling with mixed emotions: surprise, gratitude, and a gentle pride, a warmth like a small fire burning softly in the middle of a cold winter. She gripped the keychain tightly, slipped it into her jacket pocket like a personal treasure, then walked down the hallway, which was slowly brightening under the weak winter morning sun. As she passed by, the gazes that followed her were no longer filled with scrutiny or hesitation. They carried silent respect, a respect for those who dared to stand up, who dared to change a system that once seemed untouchable. At lunch that day, the Westbrook High cafeteria was packed with students, but it was no longer a place divided by class. The tables were scattered with students of every skin color, hair type, and laughter. Amara gently pushed open the cafeteria door. The afternoon light filtered through the large glass window, spilling over her, small but strong, quiet yet clear, like a lighthouse in the ocean. She stepped inside, and for the first time, the noise seemed to soften a little. No applause, no cheers, but every nod, every small smile, every warm glance that greeted her, all of it formed a silent symphony, echoing in Amara's heart like a hymn of genuine recognition. Aaliyah waved from a table near the window where the girls' self-defense club had gathered. Amara smiled, walking toward them, feeling each step as light as a breeze. As she sat down, Ruby handed her a steaming cup of hot cocoa, while Mia and Lila chattered excitedly about their plans for winter break. Skiing, a book camp, a new martial arts class that the club planned to offer for newcomers. Amidst the laughter, Amara leaned back in her chair, took a sip of the sweet cocoa, and quietly thought, "I haven't just survived. I've truly lived." Across the cafeteria, Logan, Troy, and Logan sat quietly together. None of them tried to join Amara's group. None of them sought cheap attention. They just sat there, silent, humble, like people learning how to be reborn from their own mistakes. And deep down, Amara silently thanked them. Not because they had changed for her, but because they had proven one thing: anyone can change, if they are brave enough to face themselves. That afternoon, before leaving the school, Amara stopped one last time in the main hallway. She looked around, familiar faces, bustling footsteps, laughter echoing everywhere. Westbrook High was no longer the place that once tried to break her. It had become a part of her journey, a place where she learned how to fight, how to embrace her strength, and how to believe that with courage and determination, a single person could change a small world. When Amara Brooks walked out of Westbrook High, the winter evening sunlight spilling over her lightly tousled hair, she didn't look back. It wasn't necessary, because the legacy she left at Westbrook High was not in the rumors, not in the heated battles. It was in every heart that had learned how to stand tall, and deep inside, Amara knew, she had taught them, and herself, the greatest lesson of all. True strength isn't about defeating others. It's about standing up for yourself, and for those who aren't strong enough to stand up on their own yet. Amara Brooks entered Westbrook High with a heart burdened with doubt, and left with her head held high, leaving behind a changed school, a place where courage, compassion, and true strength were planted in even the smallest of hearts. A black girl who once seemed destined to be buried under violence and injustice became the one who ignited an entire community with her resolve and kindness. And you? Have you ever had to stand up against injustice, for yourself or for someone else? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed this inspiring journey, don't forget to like, share the video with those who need a spark in their hearts, and subscribe to the channel for more empowering stories like this. See you in the next journeys.